Okay, you're with me. Can we enjoy doing this difficult topic? I arrived in Seattle May 17th, 1980. Do you remember what happened that day? Mount St. Helens. Some of you remember. All right. I was coming here to go to school, and the freeway closed, and there was ash in the air. I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know we had a volcano here. I was just coming to go to school. And that was my introduction to the Seattle experience. So I met my wife at school, and we had a vision for how to deliver mental health services differently. And how do we do it from a Christ-centered perspective and from a perspective of caring for the whole person. Now, when we first started, you did not mix what we used to call chemical dependency or addiction. You didn't mix that with mental health. Those two worlds were different, and you never talked to each other. And then there was healthcare, and we even integrate, our team are all Christians, we even integrate natural health care, nutrition. We look at the whole person. And that was different then, but now it's a little more common. But what we believe as we look at depression or anxiety or an addiction of any sort, we believe there is always hope. There's always a missing piece to the puzzle, because we have folks who come to us and they say, "You're probably my last hope. I've tried everything." Now, our culture wants to have kind of that magic pill, right? Just give me the pill. Now, I'm not anti-medication, but I'm just saying it's a lot more than just that. And anytime we look for just a single pill to solve everything, we're generally disappointed. And so my bias, as I share with you today, is a bias of we have to look at the whole person. And if there's any one single issue that every client has to work through, it is the topic of forgiveness. There's self-forgiveness for ourselves. There is receiving Christ's forgiveness that they may not even know. And by the way, we see part of our calling is to work with those who are hurting, and they don't have to be a Christian to come see us. Okay? So we have about 50% of our clients who are believers on the continuum somewhere, and then others who just say, "I need help." And we want to be there for both. And we see lives transform. There are some people, when we walk them through our initial intake, and there's some questions. Do you want faith to be a part of your program? Some say no. Okay. But we have different faith groups and things for folks, and they start to hear that others are having a good time in some of those experiences and groups, and they'll say, "Hey, can I be added in?" So that happens a fair amount. But I just want you to know, we believe that at best, that we are instruments of what God is doing. And so I just want to be real. We don't have all the answers. We pray over every client before they come. They don't know that. But we want to actually be the instruments, and we know that it's the Holy Spirit, it's God's work who does the healing. And when it was a national newspaper that was surveying people and looking at, well, where's the best place to go for depression? And one of the things that we were the only Christian facility on that list, and they put us towards the top of the list. So I just want to say, in our field, our country's in a mental health, it's beyond a crisis. We're in a mental health epidemic, and people are desperate for help, and we understand that, and we've got to approach them with great care and compassion, but we know who does the healing. So I just want to be clear about that. There's some of you, well, back when we used to feel better about getting on airplanes, do you remember, some of you will, Years ago, on Alaska Airlines, there was a card on every meal tray. Do some of you remember that? I just found one of my old cards from, this sounds amazing, actually getting on an airline and you get your food tray, there's a verse on your food tray. Believe it or not, it was Alaska Airlines. But then if you look this up, there's a whole story about this. But then what happened over time, they reverted it just to the first class. So you didn't get the verse if you were in coach. Only first class got the verse. But I was on a flight to Ketchikan, Alaska. We tend to have our clients come from all over the country, and and by the way, we're a place where people come and stay. They're there for however long they need, and 4 weeks or 6 weeks, whatever it is. But I'm on a flight, and I see this verse on my food tray. And so I am smiling, and the flight attendant said, "Why are you all smiles?" And I said, "I just think it's kind of cool you have a verse on the food tray." And it's Psalms 107:1. Give thanks to the Lord. He's good. His love endures forever. And the flight attendant goes, "Well, not everybody's happy about that." They go, "I'll come back and tell you a story." Flight attendant came back. On a recent flight, there was a woman who made a big scene about getting a verse on her food tray. And he said, the flight attendant was he said, "Ma'am, we try to be sensitive to all faiths. It's a verse from the Old Testament. We try to cover everybody," right? That was not working. She was probably growing more upset. And she said, "Well, it doesn't cover me. I'm an atheist." And God must have spoke to him, because he looks at the verse and goes, and he flips it over and he goes, "Oh, yes, it does, ma'am. On the back side, it's blank." And I thought, that blank means there's not hope. Yeah. And I thought that was a brilliant response, wasn't it? Wow. Well, here's what's going on in the area of depression. Shall we talk about it? Because it's not a blank slate. And it is hope. Now, there are slides, but this is so cool. You were given a copy of them. Don't worry about following them while I'm sharing with you today. That's going to kind of be some for you to take with you and look at later. So we just kind of did all the important notes for you. Some of you are creatives, and you'll sit there and doodle and do other kind of notes. And others of you, the real structured people, just give me the notes. So we gave you the notes. There you go. But here's what's happening in depression. Psychologists have come up with a new term to describe the generation that we're in right now. The generation that they're saying has this is a weird term, a foreshortened future. Foreshortened future. And foreshortened future means our kids, generation, do not feel hope about their future. We have a generation of apathy, a generation where life doesn't really matter. We have a culture with a lot of emphasis on death, and there's a lack of hope or optimism for their future. Are we seeing that? That lack of optimism. Well, let's look at what we've all kind of walked through. I made a list because wasn't 2020 an interesting year? Well, okay, we come up with a whole new language or lexicon. Here I wrote them all down. We had, first of all, 2 weeks to stop the spread. Then we had social distancing. Then we had the stay-at-home order. We had the shelter in place. Then we had essential versus non-essential. Then we had the new word, quarantine. And then there's the new language, PRE. Who ever thought of that? You know. And then, do you remember the one WFH, work from home? Then we had started to hear about all these different variants. Okay? So in 2021, there was the Delta variant announced. Okay, I'm just telling you what we all walked through. It was crazy. But the Delta variant, and then there was 24 other variants that we were told were coming around the corner. And if you had a baby during 2021, 2020, it was a corona baby. And then we had emergency rooms came up with a new term because they were seeing so much of it. COVID psychosis. That's actually a term that emergency rooms were using across the country to describe what they were seeing. What's COVID psychosis? People who had enough and they were starting to break from reality. Okay? Here locally, we had people in the halls of the emergency room because there was not enough places to put them that were really there for mental health issues and the desperation that people were feeling. And so I'm sharing, I know, my goodness, some of this you go, we haven't heard for a while, but just the effects of what we walked through together and what it's done to people. We took fear, a lot of fear in our culture. We mixed it with isolation, and it was kind of the perfect combination to create all kinds of problems. The psychological fallout that we're still experiencing is significant. And so we're seeing, as we enter into depression and anxiety, we are seeing folks who are still struggling because that was the tipping point for them. That was like, I can't handle it anymore. And they haven't recovered. And we see this. And for a person in ministry, a person in church, if you were a pastor, you probably found yourself, no matter what I did, I had half angry at me and half were okay. It was an impossibility because everybody had very strong opinions and people developed a very high sense of critical judgment. And now we're condemning one another and things happen in churches. So here we are walking through this still. Now, depression before COVID was the number one issue according to the World Health Organization in the world. That was the number one issue, depression. That's before COVID. Now it's anxiety and certainly depression. What's the biggest form of anxiety right now? People haven't recovered from social anxiety. But you guys are here, that's a good sign. Yeah, but the social anxiety. It's the person who goes, I isolated so much, hardly left my home. And then I got about a mile out from my home, my heart started to race, and I started to get sweaty, and my blurry vision appeared, and they were having a panic attack. They go, what happened to me? In Seattle, we started the great Seattle toilet paper scare. Do you remember that? In a Costco not far from here, some lady bought a lot of toilet paper. Do you remember this on the news? Yeah, I don't know. She bought a lot of toilet paper. And then other people started to buy a lot of toilet paper. And then it's across the country. It started here. And then it's paper towels and anything paper. And then people are filling up their garages out of fear with toilet paper. And then some people bartered with toilet paper. I trade you toilet paper for green beans or whatever. That's what happened. Now, why did people do that? Was it the fear? And the fear. So remember, and we know that fear can get a stronghold in our life, and fear is the great tool of the enemy. And so the fear took hold. And that fear, for many, is still there. It's still there. And that stronghold, and when I say stronghold, there's a spiritual issue going on with the fear. The enemy uses the fear. And we've seen that. So now we have what I'll call I'm calling it a panic pandemic. 76% of us gained weight during those last couple years. I just wanted to mention that, 76%. So if you gained weight, you were not alone. About that. What happened to our kids? Well, for a period of time, because of what happened to the kids, in the state of Washington, just by way of information, we were the 47th state to open. Okay? Open our schools, and 47th. Been a high price to pay for our kids. The year 2021, we had the highest academic failure ever on record. Our kids have not done well. Some adults haven't done well, but just the effects. So when we talk about depression, I just want us to acknowledge what we've walked through. And people are on edge still. There's a hypervigilance. Everybody's really, I don't know, the word right now is triggered. They're so easily, people driving, people are upset, and if you're putting too much time in the wrong source of news, you're going to have anxiety disorder, right? Remember, worry is a mental process. Worry, what if this, that, and I get all worried up because I'm recycling a lot of things mentally. But anxiety happens when we start to have physical symptoms. Okay, keep that. So sweaty palms, my heart rate goes up. I usually feel it in my gastrointestinal tract. The anxiety begins to have physical, it lowers my immunity. I get more sick. And so now we have terms like long COVID, and we have different ways of describing what's happened to the body. I also want to say there's always a time to deal with this in the spiritual. There's a time we have to pray off fear. And so that always has to be a part of it. There's other times where the third issue that we see is the issue of addiction. And during COVID, people started to do things like drink during the day. So we worked a fair number with technology people. And one of the issues, when I spoke with a HR person from a large technology firm that's over there, she said, well, how's the work from home going is what I asked. And she said, well, really not that well. Why would you imagine? She says, we believe that we have people who are doing coding and working from home drinking during the day. Isn't that interesting? Drinking, eating. So during this time of oppression, people started to do things to cope. And I remember talking to an individual who goes, yeah, I started drinking maybe around 4 p.m. after most of the workday was done. But he goes, after 3 months, I started drinking about 1 o'clock each day. Can you imagine this? And they're doing the computer coding. Why was it so hard to get people to get back to work? You just noticed that? They didn't want to come back. So having empathy for what we all went through, and alcohol sales hit an all-time high during 2021. There's an Alcoholic Beverage Association. I just want us to, again, understand what people have done. That says, for beer, 8 weeks of selling $1 billion of beer, $1 billion a week. How do you sell $1 billion of beer in a week? That happened for 8 weeks. The amount of alcohol consumption. Here in our state, we changed the rules. So you ordered restaurant food and it was going to be delivered to your home. You could actually have hard liquor delivered with your meal. We just changed all the rules, right? And when we had essential versus non-essential, Let's see, marijuana was essential, liquor was essential, and mental health counselors. Isn't that interesting? I mean, there's a lot on the essential list, but how about that? So we are seeing record numbers of folks. When I say depression and anxiety, it's something that's staying with them, and they'll say things like, I tried to shake it off, I tried to get it off of me, I've gone to counseling, but it's still there. And coming into our churches are folks that probably are more desperate than what we realize. Because what happened to our suicide rate? Went way up. Way up. Buried in the Snohomish, our county that we live in here, Snohomish County government website for 2021, you can find it. The suicide rate for the 12 to 17-year-olds, okay, 2021, it was the number one cause of death. Did we ever hear that? Do we know right now across the country still, 12 to 17-year-olds, suicide's the second leading cause of death? So that's what's happening. So if we look at the desperation, we look at the despair, we look at, okay, the depression that's not going away, I don't feel hope for my future, generation of apathy, schools that just graduated people on, and whether you really passed or not. And we know that for kids that were younger, the delay in social development, normal social skills. There was a period of time that we spoke with some speech pathologists who said that, and they were very busy, by the way, who said that kids were behind, particularly toddlers, in language development. So if we look, we're just saying there's been a price to pay, and the price has been depression and anxiety. Okay, so it's increased. Now, all that to say, do we have a huge opportunity just to be of help? If you've ever lived with somebody that's had a lot of depression, though it can be very, very frustrating. Let's just look at that for a minute. You try to do everything you can to help them. They live with you or they're a loved one, and nothing's changing. And you get really frustrated at your loved one because they're not changing. And they've come up to the altar every Sunday to be prayed for, and nothing's changing. And they're getting worse. And then it's easy to start to blame them, go, well, something's wrong with you. It's your fault you just stay this way. Because we don't know what to do after a while to help. So if you have somebody in your life that's struggled with long-standing depression, we do need to step back and go, okay, there's always a missing piece to the puzzle. I will stay faithful in prayer, but I can't enable or rescue them. Really, generally, I need to be the source of getting them to the right kind of help. Because we can't, if you notice, you can't fix another human being. You try. Even if it's an addiction in the home, we try. And by the way, with addiction, the one I didn't mention yet was what happened with pornography. So the average age to exposure to pornography on the internet is age 9 and going younger. We have some states that are trying to do age verification for pornography sites and so forth. But think about that. The average exposure to pornography on the internet, age 9, and then it continues, and it continues. And this is why we have 16 and 17-year-old males, primarily, who have all the symptoms of a sexual addiction at age 16 and 17. Do they suffer from depression? Do they suffer from? Absolutely. And one of the biggest things for our kids is how can we deal with this area of technology and social media? By the way, if you feel depressed and you go to social media, what happens? Do you feel better or worse? You do. And now with AI and everything, you can change anything you want to change. It doesn't have to look like you anymore. Yeah. And kids who are looking for their self-esteem through the number of likes they have. And the reason why I share the silly toilet paper story is fear causes people to run in herds. What started here because of fear, and I remember the local television station that was interviewing people at Costco. And what was the question? Why are you buying so much toilet paper? The answer was, I don't know, but everybody else is. Fear will cause us to do things that we can't always explain. It'll move us into addiction. Fear will move us into depression and anxiety. And the minute we have anxiety, it's hard to make any decisions. Have you noticed that? You have that surge of anxiety and you feel anxious and you wake up and that anxiety is all over you and you try to make a good decision about something, but you can't seem to make a decision. So in our slides, there's a map of, and you can, I think that's the next one, Anna, you can show, but just, the verses. Yeah, we need the anchor point of the verses, but after this, I think is, that's good. Now, I have to tell you, when I prepared this 1 week ago, every number on here is higher. Okay? It's all higher. So it used to be about 40% of people were reporting they were anxious. Okay. Really? The number's a lot higher. It's not people who are really sincerely struggling with anxiety. When you go to your primary care physician and they ask you those questions on depression and some related to suicide, some related to anxiety, which is required now. So, but let's say you score high on anxiety and depression, what happens? You get a prescription generally. Then what happens? I get the prescription, or here's the thing about anxiety medications. Most of them are highly addictive. Had a pastor recently who came to work with us, and he was in the Midwest. Severe anxiety after coming through everything with COVID and the church, and just overburdened with anxiety. Felt like couldn't please anybody, trying to make good decisions. Everybody turns against, it feels like it. Gets on the airplane and starts to break out in a sweat, gets having basically a panic attack, is sweating, his heart rate's racing, and they had to bring the plane back to the tarmac, and then got off the plane. He called me. This is what happened. Oh, good. All right, he rebooked his flight for later in the day to get here. And the same thing happened the second time. The plane had to be brought back because, they don't know, are you having a heart attack? What's going on? He's a pastor that some people know in the area, and here he is, second time. How did we ever get him here? It wasn't a train. But you've got to have a trusted companion with you. And we're going to pray before you board that plane, and you're going to get on that plane with this trusted companion, and you're going to get here because this is where we're going to help you. You're going to get here. 3 attempts. He got here. But anxiety and depression will always take you farther than you ever wanted to go. Sounds like maybe the definition of sin. Sin takes you farther than you ever thought you'd ever go to, right? And that's why early we got to step in and change the direction. And when you're dealing with somebody who's anxious and depressed, be careful about frustrations, be careful about blaming them, and be careful about quick judgments because they're already hypersensitive. They probably are struggling with a lot of shame. This is going on. They're probably feeling like God doesn't love me. There's something seriously wrong with me. And they feel already really isolated and alone in it. And they need us to come alongside. But what we say in our words and how we communicate to them is really important. Here are some of the signs of anxiety to be aware of. By the way, are you guys doing okay? Okay. There's more to come. All right. Oh, by the way, to say there's chronic stress out there right now, and this is a very interesting year. We're already, in the work that we do, seeing everything intensify. Interesting year. We've had a few interesting years. But election year, and we're seeing everything already intensify. People are already hypervigilant. People are on edge already. Anxiety levels in our country, is it fair to say, generally are high. A lot of chronic stress. What's chronic stress do to our immune system? We tend to get sick easier, sets us up for other issues and problems. So right now, look for somebody who's anxious or depressed. Here's a couple things to look for. There's going to be a lot of intensity of feeling overwhelmed, gloom and doom. Have you ever seen somebody doing the doom scrolling on their device? And they just, by the way, social media and so forth, when people really do have an addiction, a technology addiction, if you say, well, how long last night did you spend on that Instagram or social media? And they'll go, oh, probably 30 minutes. But it was really 4 hours engaged in, and that's the last thing they did before they went to bed. That's the last thing that went in their mind. So doom scrolling. When I'm anxious, I tend not to regulate information very well. If you've ever tried to give a person who's depressed or anxious instructions, and you've given them more than 2 or 3 things to do, what happens? They can't track. They can't do it. But if I say to them, here are 3 things, and I'm going to write them down that I want you to do, and get back with me when you do those in the next few hours. Okay, just to see, can they even track? Are they even able to follow simple directions? Sometimes when they're depressed and anxious, we talk too much. Or we give them, I want you to read this psalm, which could be a good idea, but I want you to read this, and then I will see you next week. Wait, is that going to help? Well, it may be good to do, but they're expecting they're going to be healed right away. And God heals, but sometimes there's a journey that I go through so that I can be of help to others later. In 1989, I had my own personal depression crash. I was so excited about the work that we do. Honestly, I was, my first job was at a women's prison. Can you imagine that? I was assigned to the special needs section of the women's prison in this state. Special needs. You know what the special needs section is in prison? In a women's prison? It was the center of the compound, so they had an extra layer of barbed wire around them, and so the guards could, and I was assigned to the special needs section of 25 women. But I'm a young guy. And there in the prison, they didn't like men very much. They were usually in prison because they were hanging out with the wrong guy. And so I remember in the prison, my supervisor was supposed to be a staff psychiatrist. He resigned. And they're figuring out, who's going to be Greg's supervisor? The chaplain. His name was Moses. True story. His name was Moses Harris. He was the chaplain of the women's prison, and he was my supervisor. But I came through the women's prison. Oh, I had been jumped on, beat up. Well, not fully beat up, but I'd been hit. And women did not like men, and any chance they had to attack you, they would. Remember, this what they called special needs, and my goodness. I did survive the through that. I stayed in the helping professions, and I see now that God sent Moses, Chaplain Moses, in my life because he understood what you do And the women, some of them were a lot of mental health issues and struggles and so forth. There was a lot of eating disorders in the women's prison. There were some women that would just not eat, become anorexic as a way to escape off of planet Earth, as a slow suicide. And so what I did was, after that, I went on a quest. How do you treat eating disorders? Anorexia, bulimia. And this is some of you will remember Karen Carpenter, and these are back in the days. There were a lot of eating disorders in the media. Well, I started to develop this whole person approach and how we were going to do IV nutrient therapy, how we were going to help their brains and their physical bodies and their digestion. And we got real excited about it. And I began to have folks who were coming to us from all over the country. And I worked closely with Focus on the Family, who were sending a lot of eating disorders to us. And I wasn't practicing good self-care. I was working, then it was 6 days a week. You can't see clients 6 days a week and in the evenings and trying to help everybody. I developed the helper's disease. Eventually, I really crashed. And I could not manage my life. I realized that I was kind of like some of the people I was trying to help. Couldn't wait to get home and have my half gallon of ice cream too, right? Yeah, you just start to become like what you're hanging out with. And that's what I went through. I went through deep despair. And I thought, I have chosen the wrong career. My body physically wasn't happy or healthy. And I really did struggle. And I went into a lot of depression. My wife and others kind of had to take over my schedule. And I know that it was a good solid year of soul searching and just trying to get back to physically feeling good again. And I know what that's like, that it was self-induced in my case, but I know what it's like to have good intention. Like sometimes in ministry, we have super good intention, but we stop taking care of ourselves, and then we begin not to be effective, and then we begin to question the calling on our life. I had a moment of realization where I just felt the Lord say, no, this is what you're supposed to do, but you got to do it differently, right? And so that's what I'm seeing. We work with about average 2 pastors a month who come generally from out of state, and that's what we're at. We got to do it differently because we're going to develop all the same issues of those that we're trying to help. And so if you saw I do have a before. I didn't bring it today, but I have a before picture. I look terrible. This is 1989. My wife says, you look a lot better now. All these years. But I had to rebuild my life and do it differently. And so I personally know what it takes to go through, have the crisis, and rebuild your life. And I know that there's hope. And I know hope comes when we have a plan. And really, if we were to say one verse to summarize what we're talking about today, it'd be 2 Timothy 1:7, right? We all know it. For the Lord has not given us a spirit of fear. We've talked a lot about fear, but of power, love, and remember and of a sound mind. And what makes up a sound mind? Is living a constant depression a sound mind? Anxiety a sound mind? Addiction? Because those are the top 3 right there. So what do I have? I began by saying the number one issue that people have to deal with emotionally in their life, or probably spiritually, is that of figuring out forgiveness. And the forgiveness so often, and there's deep shame. And really, if we're full of depression and anxiety, we probably don't feel like we're very lovable. We probably do not feel like God loves us. We probably do feel like some way we're defective. I'm still not well. I'm not doing good. Something's wrong with me. And for how long we stay into that something's wrong with me. And we stay locked into that. And I just want to say, I believe that's the great lie of the enemy, So we go, okay, what makes a sound mind? I cannot have addiction to have a sound mind. And we look at what's going on. What's going on in addiction in our country? Everywhere we're seeing, is there such thing as a technology addiction even? Okay, when somebody comes to see us, I'll give you a quick example. They have to give us everything with a screen. We lock it away. We have it, it's safe. But by day 3, probably half of the folks we work with start to get irritable, sweaty palms, the heart rate goes up. Yeah, sometimes they get really irritable. And they'll get really demanding. I just need to borrow my phone. I forgot to talk to somebody. I forgot I have some work emails I have to do. And they're really irritable. They're going through withdrawal. Okay, after about a week, what happens? Because after about a week, they're allowed their device on a Saturday, and they have to turn it right back in, if they've had a good week. But what happens? After a week, they go, I think I'm doing pretty good without it. I think I'll just pass. I'm good. Whereas before they were angry they didn't have it. So we look at the technology addiction. Any kind of addiction. Pornography addiction kind of is the secret addiction. And it's hard to really fully understand the numbers that are actually true. But we know it's a huge issue. We know that it's also an issue for becoming more of an issue for the younger females. So our kids are getting engaged in pornography at earlier and earlier ages. Does that become an addiction? Addiction will move us away from all of our relationships. A food addiction. I had a gal tell me one time, she said, it's easier to be intimate with food than it is people. I have more joy from food than I do people. Leave me alone. Right? So where is potentially, for a sound mind, where's potentially addiction entering in? Addiction always brings depression. Addiction always brings anxiety. The other one to look at is there's a lot of OCD as we look at this whole area of what's happening. Obsessive compulsive disorder. It was like COVID was the perfect storm. Right? COVID, you couldn't get things clean enough. Right? We worked with clients who, I'll just give you an example, wear the full gear, go to the grocery store, have the gloves on, don't touch the cart, get home, have a table in the garage, put every item I bought from the grocery store on the table, wipe all those things down, drop my clothes off before I go into the house, wipe down myself with Clorox. But that's how they lived. Because nowhere was safe. And the bondage of that fear. Now, was that kind of behavior from the Lord? No. Can we go through this, and though it's uncomfortable, can we have some peace and know that we can make good decisions? That's what a sound mind is. I can make good decisions. Yeah, the weather is rough. There are a lot of things going on around me that seem out of control. But I do not have to go victim to anxiety and depression. I may have some tough days, but I'm not staying there, right? So just be aware of those in our churches are probably hurting more than what we realize. There's probably more secrets than what we realize. I have seen people who genuinely, in praise and worship, are genuinely praising the Lord. But they will go home, isolate, and sit down and binge eat. My life is still out of control. So those are some of the realities we need to just be aware of. The word of the day really is right now trauma. If there's a number one thing that people are calling to get help for, it's trauma. Trauma means a lot of different things. I've been traumatized. Could be emotional abuse. The first book I wrote in 1992 was called Healing the Scars of Emotional Abuse. In revised it several times, but emotional abuse. That's trauma. Physical abuse, that's trauma. Living with a person who's narcissistic, that would be trauma. Somebody that always makes you feel like you're crazy, that's trauma. So people are calling and they're describing trauma. Our culture is full of trauma. And it comes in many different forms. Places don't feel safe like maybe they did before. So if I don't feel safe or emotionally safe or physically safe, people describe this as trauma. So does that ring true with some of your experiences, this little area of trauma, being traumatized? People do not call up or come to us and say, I'm anxious. And I'm worried about a lot of things, but they don't really usually say I'm anxious. But they are using the word trauma. So listen for the word trauma, and what does that really mean to them? There's a lot of lack of emotional safety when a person feels traumatized. Trauma can produce anxiety. So some of the ingredients for that sound mind, and I'm watching our time, and I would love to hear some questions and talk about some of this, because one of the things that we need to do is when we have somebody in our life that's depressed, anxious, or there's addiction, we have to pray for discernment. Discernment and wisdom. What do I need to do that would really be helpful? Because a chronic depression, chronic anxiety, addiction can easily pull us in. And suddenly we're enabling. Spoke with a mother recently. She says, my 32-year-old son is back at home. He spends all night playing games downstairs, and I don't know what to do to help him. I deliver him dinner every night. What was that? Enabling. I deliver him dinner every night. The mother who told me, I hadn't seen my son. I think he's living on the streets. I know, I shouldn't have, but I gave him $20 to make sure he'd eat. Was he eating? No. How much is fentanyl? Cheap. Well, we have a fentanyl crisis in our area that is significant. We have more people dying every day than what we really understand. I spoke with a law enforcement person this person told me that 95+% of the homeless in our county that they encounter have a fentanyl addiction. If I have a fentanyl addiction, and then some are mixing it with methamphetamine and the fentanyl, and they not only look like zombies, but they will spasm, and it's really frightening. It looks demonic. But if you think about the number of people who have a fentanyl addiction, and we go, well, they need a place to live. A fentanyl addict will sleep in the freezing cold wherever and doesn't care about the housing. That's how strong the bondage of that addiction is. All they want is the drug. So we have people dying every day in numbers higher than what we ever really truly hear about. And that's the power, that's where an addiction can take us. You guys okay? Okay, sound mind. Listen. Well, we pray for discernment, but here's some signs of a sound mind. I will have clarity in thought. Remember, anxiety, right here, this prefrontal cortex, the way God made us, this is where it's called executive decisions. This part of our brain, right here. That means I need that to make good, wise decisions. Some people refer to this part right here, the frontal lobe, as the wise mind. Hopefully it is. But if I'm full of anxiety and depression, blood flow brain chemistry changes the route. And it goes back here to the more primitive part of my brain. And then, because I'm not making a good decision, I'm impulsive or I can't make a decision. Simply the way we were wired. So a sound mind is I'm able to make a good decision. Okay? There's a place where anxiety and panic gets to be such I can't make decisions, and I need to ask for help. And the gentleman that was on I-5 heading to work downtown Seattle, having in the middle lane, broke out in a cold sweat, and a heart is pounding outside of his chest. He managed to get blurry vision, gets over to the side of the freeway, thought he was having a heart attack. Sits there, 10 minutes later, it all passes. It wasn't a heart attack, it was a panic attack. And that's how it can be so disabling. Then we're afraid, it's the fear of the fear. See how the enemy uses it? It's the fear of the fear. So a sound mind will be absence of that. Sound mind will be free from addictions. A sound mind will be able to have something that we call emotion regulation. I'm not ruled by the 3 deadly emotions. Anger, and another word for anger could be deep hurt. Another word for that could be resentments, bitterness. So anger, hurt, fear is the next deadly emotion, anxiety, worry. And then the next one is guilt or shame. So when I'm looking to help somebody with depression, it's been long-standing. Well, I want to know what's going on in their body physically. I want to know, is there a thyroid issue that's creating anxiety, a low thyroid? Are there hormonal issues that are way off and the body is just way out of whack? Is there low vitamin D? These are things that we always check. Are there severe nutrient deficiencies? What's going on in the gut? I want to know what's going on in the body that could be amplifying all those symptoms. We always check for vitamin D levels. Do you know why? It's the way God made us, because we tend to be really low in it around here. Yeah. And when it's replaced, people start to feel better. So that's where the prayer for wisdom and discernment. What is the missing piece of the puzzle in this person's life? We got to cover the whole person, the missing piece. So if I have anger, fear, and guilt in my life or shame, will I be able to have a sound mind? No, because that'll rob me of my sound mind. That's where the forgiveness piece comes in. And I have found that many times it's the forgiveness of themselves that's so difficult. Now, we've got to come to a realization of who Christ is and Christ's forgiveness and redemption, and that I have a whole new life through Christ's forgiveness. And that can be really foreign and I have to understand what that means. So, anger, fear, and shame. Shame is that deep sense that I'm defective. God really doesn't really love me. You question it. I never will have the relationship that I'd like to have in my life. I feel shame, something really wrong with me. So we want to look at that. That can be behind a lot of depression, that there's something really wrong with me. A sound mind has a capacity for joy. A capacity for joy. And I'm going to add gratitude. We see in the work that we do, maybe it's week 3, maybe it's week 4, and we keep people busy 6 hours a day. We usually end the day with a cooking class, do something fun. Well, we try to make cooking fun. But one of the things that we see that begins to shift for people is, at first, they don't like accountability. Okay, as I'm working, I don't really like much accountability. But something shifts and people begin to go, oh, it's okay. If they're in an addiction recovery program and they need to be have a urine analysis because we want to make sure you're not using. At first, no way, I ain't doing that. Week 3, yeah, sure, you can, whatever you need to do, it's fine. What happens? There's a shift because I'm beginning to grow and gratitude is entering into my life. Gratitude. So when we look for helping with depression, look for, is there gratitude in that person's life? Okay. I can look back and go, what I went through, I can look at it from a vantage point of gratitude now because it sure did equip me and I'm a lot more empathetic and it changed my whole approach. So look for gratitude. My best example of gratitude actually came through my wife, who I believe it was 12 years ago, went through cancer and chemo. It was a long 2 years of chemo thing. And chemo changes your brain, changes a lot of things. But she had a routine that each day she would go to the same chair. She didn't look so good. You know what it's like when you go through chemo. And thin, frail, period of time where there's no hair. And she would sit there and she would be writing every day, no matter what. Eventually, of course, maybe I was a little slow, but I eventually asked her, what are you doing? I'm writing a gratitude journal. You're going through chemo and you're writing a gratitude journal. Interesting. She continued that pattern and she does it to this day, 12 years later now. And, it was a few months ago, because every once in a while I will ask her, because now there's a whole drawer of journals and she writes and writes. I did ask one time, I go, in your gratitude journals, do you ever mention my name? Just wanted to know. But here's what I learned, and she still does it to this day. But who was it? A few months ago, so it'd be more now. She was at 72,000 some gratitudes. How are you? I'm a guy. Like, I can think of a few, but over 72,000 gratitudes? Where do you come up with this? But here's what she said to me that taught me a lot. She says, I know that God used it to keep me alive. Gratitude changed everything. And she said, I had optimism and hope for my future. When we start to walk through depression, anxiety, and we start to move to the other side in which we can, you start to see gratitude. Gratitude is a sign that I am healing. So remember gratitude, that capacity for joy. And, we really do have a choice of, am I going to stay in bondage to this? Sometimes sometimes it's pastoral help. That's what I needed, and it all came together for me. Other times, I need something more intense, and I need to be willing to do that or to get that help. A very young 6-year-old girl changed everything for me in the helping professions. She was from Alaska. Now, we don't normally work with 6-year-old girls, and this was a few years ago. She was apparently suffering from an eating disorder is what she was labeled. She just would not eat. Can you imagine a 6-year-old who wouldn't eat? She came from a fairly remote area. She went to a program in California, and they did the force feeding. Force feeding. They would even, if you can imagine this in the name of treatment, they kind of like a straitjacket where they would tie her arms down and then try to force feed her. Did that help? Nasal fed, everything to, well, we wanted to keep her alive, of course. This little girl and her family was a fairly intact family. There was not abuse. They were trying to do everything they could to save her life. Just couldn't figure out why she would need. Somehow they heard about us, and they wanted to come see us. Well, we don't work with 6-year-old girls. But our team got huddled around, and we prayed. And we prayed for, obviously, discernment and wisdom. And what do we do here? The team felt, nope. However, let's bring her in. And they did. Or we did. And we set up a special room. Now, we don't want anybody to die on our watch. And so we had to be really careful about certain things and IVs and certain things. And seeing her was kind of frightening. She looked like not well. Very, very frail. Very, very, very much underweight. The assignment to the team that was working with her was get down on your hands and knees and you enter into her world. And you make eye contact with her and you connect with this little girl. And day 3, it wasn't looking good. She's going to have to get to the hospital. This is not working well. And we always kept her family there. She was not dropped off with us. The family was always there. One of the things that we noticed in the hospital is everybody treated her like there was something terribly wrong with her, and everybody wore white lab coats, and she wasn't hugged, she wasn't touched. And there was no touch, no love, no hugs. Everybody kind of forgot that part. I was driving home, and not far from here, there's a veterinarian office that for many years when they had kittens, they would put a big sign up that said free kittens. On my way home, I think I was kind of praying, what do we do here? And there's a sign that said free kittens. I pulled in, and it was kind of closing time. The vet was there, and I asked about the free kittens. He goes, I only have one left. It's the runt. And you really don't want it, it'll probably die. I go, can I see it? It was one of those little runts of a kitten that looked more like a little mouse than a kitten. You could hold it in the palm of your hand. It didn't look good at all. He said, if you really want it, you could have it. Here's a tube of food. I turned around, took that tube of food, that little runt of a kitten, and I took it to this little girl. And I'm praying the whole time, Lord God, show us what to do here. I told this little girl, sweetheart, your job is to keep this kitten alive. That moment on, the tube of food and the kitty looking, but what she did was she just kept petting and petting and petting and petting. And we had a little bit of a joke. She said, this little girl's going to wear the hair off the kitten. She wouldn't stop touching it and petting it. Okay? A couple days later, while she's with one of our mental health team, and she's petting this kitten, she raises up and she says she would like to eat. What? The counselor came bolting out of the room and said, she wants to eat. And the counselor, he's still with us. The counselor's still with us. He goes, what shall I do? Because nobody had ever remembered her asking to eat, right? I said, go back in and ask her what she wants. Okay? Now, she would drink water and liquids, and we got protein drinks down her and so forth, but not food. And so she told him what she wanted. Now, some of us wouldn't necessarily consider it food, like Pop-Tarts, No. We went to the store and bought Pop-Tarts and the cereal she wanted, took it back to her. From that day forward, she started to eat. I don't know how many Pop-Tarts she ate, but she started to eat. Kitty started to grow. Right? All this petting. And this is why it's so important that we're praying for wisdom and discernment that comes from the Lord, and the Holy Spirit will guide us, because she didn't have an eating disorder. She had failure to thrive because of the human growth hormone was not being released in her body. What does touch do? That's why they do it with the premature babies. I have an uncle, and that's what he does. He works with premature babies. I probably should have called him first, but he said, no, we have a rotation schedule. They come out of the incubator, and all we're doing is stroking and touching the baby and putting them back, and they keep that schedule of touch up, because touch releases the human growth hormone. And that little girl began to grow, gain weight, and eat normally, right? That's the Lord doing the healing. Now, eventually the day came, and the kitty did fine too. Eventually the day came where it was time to go back home. She was doing good. Then we had a decision. What do we do with this kitten? I just thought, she's going to take it with her. They had a little parent meeting and so forth. And they said, no, the kitten needs to stay behind to help. She wants it to help other people. And so she said, we'll get her a kitten in Alaska. Okay. So that's what happened. And that's why I want to tell you today, no matter what the situation is, there is always, always hope. Don't give up on somebody who's coming to you with depression or anxiety. Keep the hope alive, because God will show us the way. There is an answer. There is a missing piece to the puzzle. And many years later, and they kind of stayed in contact with us many years later, and doing great, doing fine. The Lord oftentimes will have a different answer to the problem. And so let's be open to that. And we can have, despite what we're going through, and I've had my days, we can develop and help another person to develop the characteristics of a sound mind. And we need to remember, because part of that verse is the power and the love. And we needed to unleash God's love on that little girl. And God had a way of doing it through a silly little kitty, right? To start with. Tell me what you're thinking. Any thoughts or questions? Yes.
I really like the saying about gratitude.
Yes.
It comment in the your arm. I said lack of gratitude makes us resistant to accountability.
So when we, right.
And I was just kind of curious on that. And
yeah, when I have gratitude, I don't really care. I'm not hiding things. I have a whole different perspective, right? And gratitude is really powerful. I don't mean a fake gratitude. I mean, it really has to get a hold of you. And then people begin to think differently. They start to renew their mind. You know, the renewing of our mind in the scripture, they start to renew their mind through gratitude. And I think the Lord uses gratitude in some very interesting ways, because sometimes gratitude develops in the toughest of times. And though it was a number of years ago for us, I do remember my sons were much younger than asking me the question, is Mom going to die? Because, you know, you look that way. How do you answer that? And you have a whole new perspective on gratitude for every day. Every day. And that little gratitude and what happened with the 6-year-old girl taught me, the Lord used that little girl to teach me and to teach us, there is always hope. There is always hope, and don't give up. You may not see it or feel it, but there is hope. Hope tends to come when I feel like there's a plan. Sometimes the plan keeps getting revised, but hope comes when there's a plan. We know that God has a plan. Other thoughts? Yes.
So your clients are not saying they say they're atheists?
Yes.
They're healed?
The question was, we have clients who say they're an atheist, and we do have that. Absolutely. Would I ever say they're healed? No, I think there's still a major part missing. Yeah. You know, we have to deal with things like, occasionally, not all the time, but transgender, gender this, gender that. And many will say, look, I just want help. Don't talk to me about any of that religion stuff. Okay, but that's just the culture that we have is of faith, and we're going to love them. We just got a feedback survey from a client who wasn't easy to work with, and it was all over gender issues and so forth. And one of the things on the feedback survey is, this is the first time I felt treated respectfully, and thank you. So did we solve everything? No. Did we build a bridge? Yes. Yes. Is there a lot more that needs to be done? Yes. So we take them where they are and ask God, just show us how to love them. And some of our work is getting them to lean in the right direction. It's a leaning sometimes. Yeah. There's other people who happened, it was a couple weeks ago, one of the counselors said, yeah, the client wanted to accept Christ, and we did it right in my office. And then they said, what's next? And the counselor's name is Matt. And Matt said, well, to be baptized. And the guy goes, how do I do that? Well, one of the properties has a swimming pool. So we had a team of staff went down to the swimming pool, and he was baptized. So that's how God works. It's like, who's going to ask, what do I do next? Right? Okay. One more question. Yes. Okay. Okay. Lost his mother. I couldn't hear the first part of that. Can somebody just repeat that for me?
Not not my want that not my that wow that not you that all that yeah.
So lost both mother and father? And how old?
Well, I can play.
Yeah. That's significant grief and loss, isn't it? Yeah. What's the best way to help somebody who's grieving? They're going to lean into usually a lot of depression or the health. Yes. But grief is so interesting in that usually it requires us to be with them without judgment, doesn't it? To walk alongside them. And even asking them, hey, tell me what you need. I don't know. But you're there. And you're asking the question. And that grief is interesting because if you walk through it, it's like it can hit you like a wave. And you feel like, I'm so overwhelmed. And then the next couple of days, you feel like, okay, I think I'm all right. And then the wave hits again of grief. Yeah. And sometimes we're too quick to give quick answers for somebody going through grief. I had somebody who told me that, well, you lost your parents because God must think you're really special. What? Right. In our efforts to comfort, sometimes we say really things that are not helpful. Yeah, but it's the walking through, isn't it? And isn't that true with a person who's in your life struggling with depression? They just need to know we're not going to give up on them. Yeah. They're going to be hypersensitive, maybe hypercritical. They're going to be, sometimes they're blaming everybody for their problems, but we're going to stay there with them. Okay, there was one more question over here.
Great. Are there any spiritual risks that outweigh benefits or alternative treatments to anxiety like ketamine, psychedelics, cannabinoids?
Okay, this is a great question. Let me repeat it, and then we'll wrap up. Are there some of the alternative treatments that we hear? There's ketamine, which is a psychedelic, and so forth. Are there any, and some are using other, it's interesting. Cannabis or marijuana, a lot of people use it to treat their anxiety, right? What does it do, though? The rebound is it creates more anxiety. Physiologically, it creates more anxiety. We don't use ketamine, and it's being promoted a lot right now because people on ketamine have to continue to take it, and it's very short. And I feel that there's better ways to treat the anxiety. I'd rather do something that's going to have more healthy sustainability. So the ketamine was such high risk when it first started. In our state, they required you to be, if you're going to get, they used to do IVs. If you're going to get ketamine, you had to have a counselor and you had to sign paperwork related not about suicide. They didn't know what you were going to do. Ketamine? Ketamine is one of the psychedelic drugs that has become popular for treating anxiety and depression. And it's just altering brain chemistry for a short period of time. People feel better, but you got to keep using it. It's a drug. You got to keep using it and doing it over and over. So, yeah, like mushrooms, the magic mushrooms. Yeah. Okay, one more.
Here, not often. That's the it. Non that then down the central lobe as well.
Okay, what was it for the frontal lobe?
Yeah.
Rose hips? Yeah. Yes.
The toy to get on, and then that the movement in the face, top house down, W down, and what any other bowler in the head with top down.
Got it. Thank you. I don't know enough to comment. Okay.
Wow, that's not the
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. All right. We either need to do aerobics or wrap it up. Wait, I saw your hand.
maybe your clinic that to mentally ill to help. Like they can't even make sense with it when they speak. Like they understand, but they're like, hey, these are people. Like my nephew lives with me and he's mentally ill. And I don't know if he needs help. This by he's very mentally ill, but at the same time, it's
Yeah, for a person that we would say is very mentally ill, there is how much are they anchored in reality? Because there are, but what are the core things that need to be attended to for them? And so often those that have been labeled severely mentally ill or schizophrenic, we've got to look at what spiritually is going on. And if you've ever walked through a mental hospital, kind of can be a scary place. Our state has not done well with mental health issues, and we have a Western State Hospital that lost all their federal funding because we aren't doing a very good job, right? And so they can be scary, but there is something that always has to be addressed spiritually in a person. And because sometimes people begin to engage in really even what I would call evil behavior. There's other times it's something organic. Maybe it's brain damage, but there's something that happened. And that's where we got to pray for wisdom and discernment to know what really is going on, right? Yeah. And not to misjudge a person. What if it's something organic that is, and we don't know what it is? Like inflammation on the brain and so forth can really change a person's personality. Well, there's a reason for that. Yeah. Let me just mention on the book table is my newest book, Triumph Over Trauma. If you didn't get enough anxiety, there's the Anxiety Reset, and Healing Depression for Life, as well as Healing the Scars of Addiction. Those are kind of our three areas we focused a bit on. Let me mention the slides and the handouts you have. On purpose, I didn't just walk through that with you, because I want you just to carry that with you for ideas and things that you can take with you. The goal is just to resource you as much as we can, and that's intended to be a resource of maybe there's some ideas in there for you. And that's what we want to do, just give ideas. Can I close this with a prayer? Lord Jesus, we absolutely need you. And there are people, if it's not ourselves, it's a loved one, or there's somebody in our church, or Lord, it's ourselves are struggling. Give us wisdom, discernment, and healing that comes from you, but show us what we need to know. Show us what we need to know in order to have wellness, in order to have a sound mind, and in order to live a life of hope. In Jesus' name, amen. Thanks for being here with me.